Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to my podcast. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know that this podcast has a Patreon. Patreon is a membership platform that allows creators to develop a more sustainable source of financial support for their projects. My Patreon supports this podcast. If you find this podcast worthwhile, please consider becoming a patron by heading over to the Patreon link in the description. Thank you, and on with the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to my podcast. Today I have a very special episode with a former classmate who is going to remain anonymous. I met him when I was in my MFA program at Sarah Lawrence College. I did an MFA in my late 30s. I'm 40 years old now, so it wasn't that long ago. But in my late 30s, I went back to school, and my MFA program at Sarah Lawrence was focused on creative writing. And this is one of the students that I met there. One of the few people I actually got along with, who I saw eye to eye with, who I felt like I could just talk to, and I could stand hearing him talk. It's a very rare thing when I can stand to hear people talk. And so that I knew there was something special about this person. And so when he reached out to me, I was very happy. He actually emailed me and he said, "Hey, I had listened to your podcast with David Hollander and David Ryan. Loved it. Loved to be on." Said, "I'd love to have you on, man." And so we finally did it. We kind of go back and forth a little bit. It's just kind of about creativity, the creative life, the creative process. And I think you can apply a lot of our conversation to just about any medium. We talk a lot about writing, and I talk a lot about filmmaking. But if you're a visual artist, if you're a painter, if you're a graphic designer, if you just love to create for the hell of it, I think some of the philosophies and ideas here can absolutely apply to you. And so the name of this episode is simply Creativity Across Disciplines. Enjoy. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
This is the one moment that I can actually shut the phone off physically, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, I get you there. That's a big thing. I think that I've been sort of figuring out nowadays. But you're saying that you were working on you already had this thing drawn.
Oh yeah, so at the start of the pandemic, I went on this rampage of just banging out all of these drafts for all these projects I've had doing for like 20 years. And this was one of them, and it ended up kind of organically becoming an outline for a 37 chapter graphic novel. And
Okay.
we're talking over 1,000 pages. And the draft exists in these massive binders. There's like 5 binders of panel outlines for each page, plus a script for each page. And it looks sort of like a stage play.
Okay.
And each panel has a description for it. So now what I'm doing is I have this 11 by 17 vellum, which is what typical comic books are drawn on. And I'm basically I'm mapping out all the panels for every chapter, and I'm doing some level of illustration when it comes to scenery because I can do scenery, but then I'm doing stick figure placement for each character. And what I'm going to do is, once I've made a lot of progress in laying out all of these chapters, I'm going to hire an artist to help me come up with some sort of template for each character and each key location, and then use those. I mean, we're talking a massive production process that I predict will take at least 3 to 5 years. So I'm still in the early stages of this thing, but my task is really just to have the thing developed and written so that when I do hire a penciler and an inker and a colorist, the direction is there. Like I don't
Yeah.
have to explain anything. They can look at the panels, they can look at the script, they can look at the concept art and know exactly what's supposed to go where. I've never done a graphic novel. This is the only way I could think to do it. Because I'm not a guy who can just be like, all right, just do 6 panels and have this be the progress. I need to know exactly what's in every single one. And I have to
Yeah.
dictate what's in every single one.
Yeah. Get
Because
kind of like that. Yeah. You want to see that vision, bloom as much as you originally intended it, kind of.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I get that. Have you read I think Alan Moore did a book on writing comics?
I haven't read any of his stuff other than some of the comic books he's actually written.
Yeah.
So obviously Watchmen, and then I have From Hell here, which I
Yeah,
think that's
I
him.
can see V for Vendetta on your shelf, I think, right? In the left-hand corner.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then this one is a strange one. It's called On a Sunbeam. On a Sunbeam.
Never
It's
heard of
like,
that.
I mean, it's about as art house as these things get. It's like really interesting.
Oh, I'm gonna have to write that down. Are we recording right now or?
Yeah, I do it right away.
Oh, okay.
Um,
All right.
just let me know like if you want something chopped.
Yeah, yeah, it's all good.
But yeah,
On a
this is like
Sunday.
my graphic novel shelf.
Nice. Do you read manga at all?
No,
Or uh
haven't gotten into it. Haven't been able to.
okay. I feel like I need to make a recommendation then.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of Junji Ito?
No.
He's a horror manga writer. He has this book called Uzumaki that is the entire thing is basically this town becomes obsessed with like the notion of spirals, and it's like body horror and just some of the most horrifying drawings you'll ever see. It
Okay.
is
Can you
it's
spell it?
amazing. Yeah, it's Uzumaki.
Okay, I'm gonna look that up. I
Yeah,
like
I
recommendations for graphic novels because
uh,
I find those are the hardest. Like I'll go into these stores and it's almost always superhero, typical American level superhero. So when I can be recommended something that I've never heard of, I'll definitely pounce on it. And Sunbeam, that's a talkie. Like it's set in space and all that, but it
yeah.
doesn't have to be. It's a talkie.
Yeah, it's more about, I think, yeah, like you said, like an art house, like more less punching people in the face and more kind of getting to the heart of, what somebody's going through or
Yeah.
what have you. Um,
And that's something that I want to see more of actually with this medium because I don't think it needs to be relegated to action.
to be honest, I feel like that's personally what I want to see in science fiction fantasy, like not even in graphic novels, just in terms of fiction too. Because I mean, like I don't get me wrong, I love like that pulpy kind of, oh, the whole universe is at stake, or if it's a fantasy novel, oh, the whole world is going to be destroyed by the evil one, what have you. Like I love that type of stuff, but at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of room for other things. And I mean, I guess there is, because I mean, like epic fantasy, kind of goes into like that whole thing, and I think space opera kind of does, and things like that. But I find it really interesting to see like, you know, um, actually, have you ever read anything by M. John Harrison? He's this really great science fiction writer. He's kind of part of like that new wave science fiction movement. But he wrote a couple of fantasy novels that are all it's like a series called Veraconium. I just read them over the summer, and the third one, I think it's called In Veraconium. It's basically just all about this artist in this fantasy city, and like I love that type of stuff. Like it's like a consular roman in a fantasy setting, which is like I love. Like I just find that so interesting to sort of have that setting influence sort of the characters and sort of influence that plot, instead of having it be, about some epic struggle, some huge battles, everybody's fighting, some sort of political intrigue where everybody's plotting behind the throne. It's just cool to see that other side of things, and sort of take, I think a lot of those literary conceptions, I guess, and bring them to, more so-called like genre tropes, I guess, genre settings. Um,
Yeah, I before I did my MFA, I did a film called Death in Life, which I'm now making a prequel to in graphic novel form as well, which is actually further along than this thing I was just talking about. And it's all set on this city on a planet far from Earth, but they're all humans who migrated there. So it's set
okay.
in the future. And actually, the novel, the prequel novel, is called Future, and it was meant to be this art paradise, but they fucked up the city planning so bad that
Mhm.
everybody who moved there are so distracted by sort of the lack of feng shui or whatever that nobody's creating anything. And the mystery is why. Why is this what was supposed to be an art paradise in space completely unproductive?
Yeah.
And it's just about
Uh,
the artist mentality, really. It has nothing to do with space other than
yeah.
the
Yeah. I
visuals.
mean, but I think, I mean, like maybe I'm just sort of reading into that in a different way, but there's sort of almost like a bureaucratic type of thing too. Well, not exactly like sort of like the littlest little thing that you can point at as an excuse,
Yeah.
to not do your own little thing.
Well, in
Uh,
in the original film, the bad guy's the city planner. He's the guy who invents the super blocks and the grid and
yeah,
sort of a commentary on the housing projects here in New York. There's these super blocks without community, without access to community and all that. And
yeah,
so yeah, the bureaucracy is totally the bad guy here.
yeah. I mean, it's like kind of just I mean, Kafka in space,
Yeah.
almost.
It's like
Um,
how much great art was sacrificed because we had to sit down and do our taxes in April. Like,
uh, yeah. I just got a text from one of our friends from grad school. Do you remember by any
yeah,
chance?
yeah,
Because we've been texting back and forth, and I only read a little bit of his because I needed to jump on here, and he was saying that like he's working like some job, I think writing articles or something like that. And I've heard from if you remember, I think she's doing the same thing. She's working as a copy editor. Um, and like all of these, people who are amazingly talented writers are taking these jobs in writing, and I'm like in my head I'm like, oh, like I I I get why you'd want to do that, and I think I wanted to do that, but then I kind of realized that like you're gonna have no headspace for your own creative pursuits.
yeah.
Like actually before I came to Sarah Lawrence, because I dropped out of a previous program. I don't know if we've talked about that before. I'd gone to the new school for like a semester in their MFA program, and I'd left, and in sort of my year off because I was kind of reapplying. I had an interview with like one of those companies that they basically like companies will hire these people to write articles for their own websites. It was just like something like that, but they only paid by the article, and but you still work there, but they only paid you monthly, like all together in like one lump sum. And so I was like, on one hand, I'm like, okay, I get paid to write, like that sounds amazing, but think about that, like you're only getting paid per article, and you're not getting paid very much per article, and you only get paid once a month, so you don't really have any regular income unless you basically just burn yourself out. And I'm like, I I need to do, you know, my own writing. Like, I
Yeah.
yeah,
I get offered paid writing gigs all the time, more than anything, and I've never accepted one because of that reason.
yeah,
I don't think it's valued enough. And I'm a guy who has to put a lot of mental power into something before I deliver it. I'm
yeah.
not going to
See,
burn myself out for somebody
I
who's
yeah. I mean, I feel like if I think for me, like it's, you know, it. I mean, I really haven't gotten any offers, but like I feel like for me it would be like a per case basis, because I think there's probably something out there that would be really interesting to take on. Or I mean, like I know during that time I was writing for like a music blog, like the heavy metal blog, and working, I did probably 2 articles a week, maybe a little more at that time, and I was proofreading for everybody too. And so like that was a lot of fun. Like I think that's the biggest thing for me personally, is just like writing is fun, creating stuff is fun, and I want to spend as much time doing that as possible, and I don't want to have to use that same energy for to pay my bills.
Yeah.
um
I feel the same
Fortunately.
way, not just about writing too, but like also about filmmaking. I got really sick of making films for other people,
Hmm.
because that's something that I've always done even before tackling the writing part
like
of my
like
life.
like commissions, like for like businesses, or
Yeah,
just
everything. So I'll be brought on to direct some corporate stuff, some commercials. Sometimes filmmakers want somebody to come in and kind of run their productions for them because they don't know how to do it. But sometimes it's really good money and I can't resist. But sometimes it's just like it's not worth the creative energy. Like I'd
yeah.
rather reserve it for the stuff I'm already doing. Because in
Yeah.
the end, that stuff will pay off, hopefully down the road.
Yeah. I mean, I also, I mean, I'm in agreement. I just wonder whether, I think sometimes, I think sometimes there might be some opportunities that could be missed, that could be, a great collaborative opportunity. That's something I think if I've learned anything over the time since we've graduated, it's that I need a community. And part of being in a community is being able to collaborate with people and to be open with people. And I'm not saying that you aren't open to that. I'm just I'm just sort of looking at my own
Yeah.
my own
So,
foibles.
I used to be in a great deal of fear about missing out on something. Like, what
Hmm.
if I don't notice this? And what if this ends up working out and I don't do it? But I don't do that anymore because one, I'm 40 years old now, and I've kind of figured out how to read a situation. I
Hmm.
mean, I was offered recently an what on the face looked like the perfect gig to run a full blown production creative production studio in Manhattan, have access to all the resources for both my film work, as my podcast, as well as the stuff they were doing. But as I dug a little bit deeper and I realized that I would have 100% been alone in this, the people behind it didn't know what they were doing, that there was question on whether or not they were supposed to be in that building to begin with. I couldn't find any information about like who owned the building, where they, and so like it just became a thing where like, well, there's too much mystery. They're not being straightforward with me, and so then I can turn it down. I had to turn it down because it was almost too good to be true,
Yeah.
and I found that that doesn't exist. Too good,
Yeah. And
yeah.
unfortunately, yeah.
But
Did it
yeah,
actually, when I in the middle of Sarah Lawrence, my time at Sarah Lawrence, I was looking for a job, and it was one of those, I was looking on like for like tutoring online sort of thing, and like I came into that whole like so good, like too good to be real sort of thing, because it was like, oh, set your schedule, we'll pay you, et cetera, et cetera. And like it just turns out that you're waiting around on your computer for hours to
yeah,
see if anybody shows up who actually needs tutoring. And even if you get to that point, the students are just going to ask you for the answers to
yeah.
to whatever they're trying to learn. So it's
Yeah, I did
yeah.
tutoring in my undergrad, and that's the one thing that I realized about that too is like they're not coming to you for any other reason than they just want to be given the answers.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to give students like the benefit of the doubt, in a way, but yeah, I think sometimes, at least in like an online setting, I think it becomes a little more nebulous to figure out someone's intentions. Speaking of communities, that's actually been my experience with like Reddit and stuff like that, is just not being sure of sort of where people are at, with like, yeah, I guess their intentions in terms of like creating. because I mean, I was trying to put like a subreddit together of, writers who were kind of interested in more experimental stuff. And, just, I guess, and you've talked about this a little bit in your episode with David Hollander. And I think with David Ryan that, sort of the best experiences that you had in your time in grad school were being able to converse with your peers and, have, these conversations that were kind of expanding your mind as opposed to sitting in the middle of a writing workshop and being told what part of your story is bad.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was trying to, garner that, trying to grow that type of mentality on Reddit, because a lot of really, maybe I just haven't found the right website, but a lot of writing tools online are more geared towards that peer review and like that writing workshop format, which is in some ways really helpful. But in other ways, when you want to talk about how you're writing, and sort of your process and things like that, it, that kind of gets pushed aside in favor, it's always product over process. Whereas I feel like the other way around kind of is more rewarding in a lot of ways. But I was trying to build this community, and people were just really obsessed with, not really talking about why they did something or how they did something as much as they were just kind of trying to take their writing and just shove it in everybody's faces. It kind of reminds me of sometimes of what grad school has kind of turned into, of just like, oh, publishing is the most important thing, when it really isn't. So
Well, for the grad school, that's their sort of currency.
oh
We
yeah, for
have these
sure.
graduates who are published under Penguin or some bullshit publisher.
Yeah.
I'm going to burn so many bridges on this podcast. But the thing is I've always been mystified by the people who thought page count mattered. Like I remember sitting in the class that we had, the craft class we had together. It was a speculative fiction class.
Yeah, with Paul
And
Lafarge.
at one point I
Yeah.
walked in the morning and there were people debating about, like, they were like competing almost in conversation. Oh, over the weekend I did this many pages. And in my head I'm like, I bet none of those pages matter for shit. Like, what's the quality of those pages? If 20 pages was your goal,
Yeah.
I'd rather just write a paragraph that just blows my mind rather
Yeah. I
than
mean,
20 pages.
I I wonder though whether those people, because I think there are a couple different ways to kind of even approach generating writing in the first place. Um, and I think a lot of people, kind of go in with an idea, and they're like, oh yeah, like you said, like, and I think that what you said really rings true there, is that like, oh, if you're going to spend like 20,000 words writing a story that only needs to be like a quarter of that, like that's kind of a waste of time in some ways. I know personally, like I do 1,000 words a day, but I don't really do it towards anything in particular. It's more just, you know, kind of just pulling it out of your butt, in a way, just kind of riffing. Just to like it, I look at it as like, I kind of think. Do you remember? Did you ever read Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory as a kid?
Yeah, the Roald Dahl book. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
like
it's Charlie, right? Charlie and the
yeah,
Chocolate
it was
Factory.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just think of it because there's a section in the book where Charlie would, he would get a Wonka bar every year for Christmas, or no, I'm sorry, for his birthday, and he would make it last like months by just taking a little nibble of it at a time. And I kind of do the same thing, where just like if I have a project that I'm really working on, like I'll just take that little nibble and just do a little bit every day. Like that's how I tend to work on stories, that just, it'll come out of this daily writing or what have you. But I think that like having, if I spent like 20,000 words on that, like the word count itself is extraneous. It's not really the point. It's more just getting there. It's more practicing, and I feel like most of my stories have come out of that as a result. But again, that's just me. I think a lot of people kind of go in with an idea. Um,
Yeah, and I'm sure that there are some people who are going to be like, well, I write 20 pages a day and I'm published, but like the point is it's the practice, not the amount
exactly.
of pages. Yeah, one of the things that I fell into, because I used to think that, to me, I guess what I was trying to get to when I mentioned it was the competition aspects of it seemed amateur
Yes.
to me. And one of the things that I really appreciate that I came into almost around the time that I went back to school, I went back to school in my mid 30s, was I no longer felt the need to do that. I no longer felt the need to publish it. I no longer felt the need to get an agent. All that stuff that I had in my brain when I was younger kind of went the way of the dodo when I figured out finally how to write. And
Hmm.
knowing how to write and knowing how to write are two different things, right? So what's the best way to put this? Well, you were saying initially that you like to dabble. You go in a little
Yeah.
bit, leave it, go in again later, a little bit, leave it.
Yeah.
That's my favorite way of writing. I've been working on a novella that way for like 4 years now. We're talking like really short novel. And when I take that approach, I find the stories surprise me more. And that's one thing that I don't hear enough writers talking about is the need to be surprised. I need to be surprised by the final thing. I need the
Yeah.
final thing to always be, and this applies to my film work as well. I never thought that I could do that. I never thought that that was a story that was in me. Case in point, I started this one novella about a guy who kind of comes into some bit of magic where he can seduce anybody he wants. It was meant to be a tongue-in-cheek Bukowski-ish like raunchy thing. I'm like, I'm gonna make a ton of money off this, and all these idiots are gonna buy it. But then it sort of evolved into an alien abduction thing where they're like, you're not allowed to have that power. And so now the whole final third of it is him kind of being taken down by an alien civilization who's sort of where it reveals that we as humans are under the thumb of management, so to speak, and that he fucked everything up by figuring out this magic. And I don't know, like had I rushed to finish it 4 years ago, it wouldn't have evolved into that. And I don't know if it's done, and I don't know if I'm keeping that. But if I waited another year, what could it possibly evolve into? It's this like
Hmm.
this organic experimentation thing where if the final thing is just a mishmash of all the drafts, that's cool too. Like
Yeah.
that was one idea I had when I was in a meeting with David Hollander, and I pitched to him this idea. What if I took and just published all the drafts of the same short story? It's just a book of the same short story in every variation that has
Yeah.
ever existed. And that's what I'm more interested in. I don't care about the polished work.
Yeah. See, that's so funny. I'm the same way. Like that's something I've been thinking about a lot is sort of like the messiness of what like art can do. Like because I mean I I actually do a lot of music as well. And I think there's a big trend of people are using like Ableton and all of these DAWs to create all these works. And I love the stuff that people create, but I feel like whenever I use that stuff, it's always I can never get anything done. But what I do now is I just have I have a modular synth that I just patch up from scratch every single time and just kind of wing it and just improvise, and just what comes out is messy. It's very like uncouth in a way. It's very unpolished, but I love it. Like I love how it comes out, and that's kind of the same thing with my writing. That's kind of what I like to do, is not worry too much about making sure that I'm doing some sort of Don DeLillo, like every single word is perfectly picked out and placed in the sentence. But while that can have a lot of that can be a very beautiful outcome, but I feel like I just want to get on to the next thing sometimes too. But yeah, like that's definitely a big thing, is like, and I think with publishing, it's you're kind of inviting things to be too perfect almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the same thing with every medium. The moment you intend to have the public pay money for it, you're almost obligated to polish it.
Yeah.
And I've seen things where people will release independent documentaries and stuff and end up being sued because somebody paid money for something really low quality. And
Yeah.
there's actual legal arguments that go back and forth about that stuff.
Oh
Like,
yeah. I mean, do you play a lot of video games or
I don't do
um
video games. No,
okay.
it's the
Have you
one
heard
medium.
about have you heard in the news about Cyberpunk 2077, or I think that's
Mm-mm.
the name of the game? So the company that put this out, they've been talking about this for years, really just gearing up, really creating a lot of hype. Keanu Reeves is attached to this video game and stuff like that. And like he came out at like I think one of the video game awards and just did like a whole thing. It was, I mean, people were really pumped for this thing. And when it got released last year, it was essentially unfinished. And it was so full of glitches and to the point that it was almost unplayable. And people just really like I think the developer ended up getting sued by their own shareholders because of just the lack of finished quality. And see, like I guess that's a different circumstance than what we're talking about because we're talking about like let's face it, we're kind of low level. We're not spending $1 million developing a video game here, and we're not getting Keanu Reeves attached to play it, and things like that. We're not spending 5 years developing this thing and then having it come out like this. It's just interesting, sort of that level of what like money talks, I guess, in that way.
Yeah, it sounds too like there was a bit of I forget the word slips my mind right now, but they were almost too confident, and they released it thinking it was going to be a hit no matter what happened. It's
Oh,
almost like that Star Wars presumption. Hey, we
oh
could put
yeah,
horses on spaceships. It's still going to make all this money.
yeah.
Like,
This is going to sound completely pretentious, um, but I I almost think of myself as a musician who writes in a way. Um, just because like I love the story that I can read, that I'm telling, but I also love playing with words at the same time, and I love kind of like the messiness, and like we've been talking about, just sort of that that's something like a free improviser would have with their own music, that they're not worried about being perfect with it, you know. But yeah, so like as a result, I just kind of I kind of just pull, and I guess I'm kind of like a dilettante, I guess, right? Just sometimes it's spec, sometimes it's something in between, sometimes it's more literary, sometimes it's more experimental. um One of the most inspirational people for what I do has been a composer in New York who just doesn't give a shit when it comes to genre and things like that. He will just merge all of this stuff together. He has a group that combines Jewish klezmer music with like free jazz. But then he's also doing, back in the 90s, he did this project called Naked City that was, these uh, these just insane compositions of like, they would be like a minute long. You'd have like hardcore, like grindcore metal going on, but interspersed with that was like all of these massive tempo changes and genre changes. So like they would go from like screaming nonsense to jazz to country to honky tonk to to R&B, and then right back to metal again. And it's like they were able to do this like in real time and stuff. But like all this to say is like I like that was really inspirational for me because when it comes to my own like media consumption, I'm not really, I'm not just reading science fiction or fantasy. I'm reading a bunch of stuff. I like to kind of flip flop around, because things get, if for me, if I'm reading the same thing over and over again, it can get a little boring. It's like it's like putting on CDs in my car for me. Actually, like I'll put on, I'll try to pick out what I listen to in the car by how opposite it is from the previous album. So like I'll go from, like Aretha Franklin to, speed metal, and then, to, just I don't know, like some dance music or something like that, just to kind of have that variety. So like, all that complicated answer to a simple question is that I read a lot of science fiction, but and fantasy and like just speculative fiction, but I like just reading a lot of different things at the same time.
I always believe that people, if they're in that creative field, should consume everything.
Yeah, I I agree.
one of the things that I when I went to film school, it was a very technical program, how to use a camera, a proper way to record audio, all that shit. And I always thought that film school should have been more about how to look at art.
Yeah,
Just like I
definitely.
feel like the same thing with the writing program. There wasn't enough about how to look at and interpret the world and human
Ah,
behavior, or
yeah.
even just like if there was a mandatory philosophy class, that would have been so great for an MFA writing program. Nobody
I
thinks
mean,
at that level though.
you ever think that, because I mean, the way I've tended to think about sort of MFA programs, at least for writing, I guess the ones that I've been in, often it seems like a lot of that mentality is on the students. And I've just noticed that a lot of, a lot of writers and just in general, not only at MFA programs, but, kind of online too, just, they don't seem to care much about how they write as much as what they write. And, you know, I, I let like they care more about the details of a story, or, I was reading this interview with David Hollander where, someone described it that like literary fiction will sometimes, like authors will use characters to just be mouthpieces for their own political views or what have you. And it's like that's kind of what happens a lot. And it sometimes it just feels like a philosophical diatribe, but it's like in the context of fiction. Um, Not to say that there isn't any value to that. It's just like I think that what you say is just as important as how you say it. And like I feel like you can make your point even more powerful by sort of influencing the way you write something. Like it's one like a musical analogy, it'd be like um okay, like there's this musician, Phil Elverum. He does he used to be part of this band called the Microphones. He does I think a band called Mount Erie now, and he put out this album a few years ago that I've actually never listened to the whole thing because it's so just devastatingly depressing, because it's basically just him in his bedroom recording this album just on like an acoustic guitar, because it's all about his his wife who had died of cancer. And he's basically just dealing with the fallout of that and the fact that they have a daughter that he has to take care of by himself now. And, just being just completely just blown astray by this loss, and, having that recording, having that be really lo-fi, and just right there, you're really hearing him, just doing his thing right there. It's not in some sort of studio. Like that really lends itself to a more powerful experience in my mind. I just think the same thing is true regardless of what medium you work in. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Did you read Anthropica?
Yes, yes. I got it when it came out. I really loved that thing. I was thinking about it a little earlier in our conversation because sort of the way he wrote that, sort of taking all these different scenes and not really worrying about the connective tissue between them. I really like that a lot. That's something I notice a lot of really great writers doing, and I really love the way that works because it's it kind of makes you put in a little more effort almost, in some ways that you have to connect A to B yourself. um but also just it feels a little cleaner in a way, like it's not it feels less bloated, because I think, okay, like I just read this, I just finished this book the other day. It's called The Stars Are Legion. It's this, it was a really interesting like science fiction novel. It was like all of this is like colony ships, but they're all like made out of like organic matter, kind of. It was really interesting, but a lot of it, like it felt like a lot of the story was taken up with these, sort of these scenes of characters getting from A to B. Whereas like if you had just gone to B, like you would have maybe halved the size of the book in a way. Um, it's just interesting to I wonder whether that's like a literary trope, or like like at least in terms of like cutting that stuff out. Um, I don't really know, but yeah, I'll say Anthropica was really, it was great. I feel like I need to reread it again because I definitely didn't get all of it. Like I feel like it's one of those books that you kind of need to read a couple times because just because I think you always discover a little, like something a little more
Yeah,
about
it's
it.
very dense.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I told Dave, but I told Jan, my girlfriend, that I'm pretty sure it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really agree with what you were saying about how he doesn't seem to worry about the connective tissue between the vignettes. They just are
Yeah.
what they are, and you can find it for yourself. I love that way of writing. That's something also that I think I've been experimenting with a little bit with this monster movie I've been developing. I got so
Art
many
house
fucking
monster
projects,
movie.
bro. Yeah, I got
Yeah.
so many projects. Yeah, I was developing a vignetted monster movie, and it started off with, let's just make a cheap monster movie that we can put on Amazon and make some cash off of. Of course, it's not that easy. Like, I started going into, well, what is a monster? Why are humans so scared of what goes bump in the night? What if that thing that goes bump in the night is scared? Like, and it's just like I mentally start unpacking all this shit, and then I started creating all these vignettes where I had different characters reacting differently and seeing the monster in a different light. So then suddenly I'm like in this engineering phase where I'm like, all right, now I got to come up with three different monsters. One is cute and cuddly, the other is horrifying and greasy, and the other one is the one you don't see, the one that you think is there, or the one that you're spooked by, but you'll never see it. And so now I have this monster movie in pre-production that is almost inspired by this idea of just, again, avoiding putting the connective tissue together. Fuck the audience. Have each individual one speak for itself, and then let people decide whether or not they go together or how they go together.
Yeah, like having that sort of that separation between things, it can offer a lot of interesting possibilities. I kind of almost reminds me of did David Ryan ever talk to you about like rhizomatic theory?
No,
Yeah, because
sounds
I
like
mean I
something you would talk about.
it is. I to be fair, I love David and I love the theories that it comes up with. I understand very little of any of them. Do I just don't think I'm on that plane of intelligence.
Well, when David talks about theories and the philosophies and all that, he's like the best friend. I look at him as one of my best friends that I'm having a beer with. We're just chilling. He's gonna let things out on me. And then 3 days later, whatever, something that he said that I wasn't thinking about will just pop into my brain, and then suddenly I'm
Yeah.
writing. And that's kind of how, that's David's role in my life is every couple of years, I want to be able to talk to him. And then several days later, I'm writing. And I don't know
Yeah.
why. I don't know what he
I
said, but I'm doing it.
I kind of get that. Like it's for me, it's probably much longer than that. It's not even it's not even a couple days. Like it's probably years, honestly, that I'm like,
Yeah.
oh crap, like like that was a great idea. Like I remember I went through some of my old notes a few months ago when I was moving, and I was like, oh wow, like I need to keep this around. Like, why didn't I get this the first time? It's so fascinating, sort of the things he comes, to class with. What's really funny is that I almost didn't take his class. Like, I was in, like, I think my first class with him, or my first meeting with him, I was like, I find this like interesting, but at the same time, I'm like, I'm not much of a theory person. I don't really, sometimes it's difficult for me to see like the practicality of theories and that sort of like textual analysis. And he's like, yeah, like you're welcome to stay, but I don't, you might not have the best of time in this class or something like that. Like he's being like so nice about it. And I was like, dude,
Like in,
I need to stay now. Like, I don't know whether it's me being stubborn or just kind of wanting to see like, kind of like a matrix, like how deep the rabbit hole goes, kind of thing.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it was super interesting just to see what he comes up. Well, and he's not even coming up with it. He's just like he's able to interpret all of these thinkers in just sort of condense what they've done in apply it to writing, and
Yeah.
like I love that. Yeah,
Yeah, that's one of the things that blew me away about his craft class was, I mean, unlike all the other craft classes, his was, I don't know if you took the same one I took, but,
I did a writing workshop with him.
oh, you did a workshop. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I wanted to do a workshop, but they wouldn't let me because I took a craft class, and he was really sought after. But
yeah.
the day one, he's just like, you don't really need to turn anything in. Just hear me talk for the whole semester. And it was just literally just a lecture on how to kind of dig deep into the gook of the mind and pull out all that stuff that we're avoiding confronting. And honestly, after the first day or second day of hearing him talk, I started writing one of my favorite short stories. I don't really write fiction. This is a
Yeah.
rare exception, but he got me going, man. And for the last 2 semesters I was in that program, I just worked on this one story.
What was that? Was that Fritz?
That was Fritz.
Yeah,
That
because
that
I
came out of like day 2 of his lecture.
that's so funny. Yeah, I remember you. I think you brought that in to our workshop because I
Hmm.
we were in Hollander's workshop, right? I
Yep.
think the last semester. Yeah, I do. I remember that. I remember you talking about that with David on the podcast, which was really funny. That you said you spent like an entire like evening basically just
Yeah.
writing the
Till
thing
like
out.
1 a.m. So
Yeah.
it happened. So David seeded it in my brain. I go out to the Wrexham parking lot. I get in the car and I hit the parkway and I'm driving upstate because at the time I was borrowing a house in the woods because it was easier to drive upstate than it was to commute to Staten Island.
Oh God, yeah.
And
Like just like side note, Westchester is like maybe like the worst like location to get anywhere
yeah,
except for like the city itself.
so
But
I wasn't in Westchester though. I was in Putnam County, which is the next one up.
yeah.
And but I had to drive through all of Westchester to get there. But I'm on the highway heading north, and then suddenly it just hits me. The whole fucking story just it popped into my brain. Whatever he did unlocked it, and it wasn't just like a little bits. Like the whole fucking thing was there. And the moment I got in, I heated up some canned meal or whatever, and I just hit the notebooks because I always hand write everything or hand draft
Oh,
everything,
yeah.
and till 1 a.m. I was just going through it. It was an evening class, so I was probably writing between 8:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. And
Do
then
you
I was up the next morning. Yeah,
do you still you still handwrite everything?
yeah.
Yeah. See,
Do you want to see?
yeah, well, it's just that's something I really want to do more. I just don't. I think it's because I can, bang out 1,000 words in
Yeah.
like 5-10 minutes.
Well, let me
You know.
show you. I'm gonna shut off the video feed for a second so I can get
Yeah.
up, and then I'm gonna show you what my notebook looks like because it might not be what you think. So this is the development book for the monster movie.
So you basically just do like a notebook per project, kind of.
For the films, yes.
Okay.
And if it's a writing project, it starts off in a compilation book.
Yeah.
Because I have so many writing projects that I get bored with.
Yeah.
So it really has to earn its way into its own book.
I do that with Scrivener files.
Yeah, I'm gonna be not showing this on the podcast, but it's very loosey goosey. So, try to find an interesting looking page. I'm not really writing prose though. I'm almost just like using it as a way to get my brain trained into sort of coming up with the concepts I need. Because the language is for me, it's just the mechanics that I got to work through. It's really just finding all of the ideas that I need.
Yeah, like just kind of like exploding your brain kind of onto the page, and then kind of like sorting it out later.
It's not even writing; it's more just coming up with these concepts.
Yeah, like it's almost like a free association.
Yeah,
in a way.
Because what's more important to me is understanding not just meaning, because it's a loaded word. It's about what are the 1,001 ways people are going to possibly interpret this.
Yeah.
And then can I think of the 1,002nd way and then do that instead? Like, and I'm not much of a prose writer. I get bored with trying. So it's really for me just taking these ideas and these visuals, like what do stars mean in every culture? You know, I'm more intrigued by, I was watching this YouTube video recently about this ancient sort of telling of a mysterious star that appeared in the sky. It turned out, astronomers figured out that a star went supernova. And it was a star that wasn't typically visible to the naked eye until it went supernova. But ancient peoples described it in their old writings as a mysterious moon-sized star that appeared in the sky, and it was there for 6 months. Because supernovas, when they go off, they'll be there for 6 months and then fade off.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing intrigues me because that could be interpreted as so many different things. And so then I'll just go into these pages, I'll sketch out what it might look like, and then I'll write down all of the different meanings that it could take. And somehow in that process, I'll figure out what the scene is. And only in the last minute will I go into the actual writing software. In this case, it's Final Draft. And then I'll bang it out. Boom, boom, boom. It's just the production process, which is the most boring part of it.
Yeah.
The best part is the notebook. It's the sketching.
Yeah, I get that. Like that's definitely like for me, like my least favorite part is editing stories for sure. Yeah. I mean, I mostly just do short fiction nowadays.
And I actually consider writing editing. Like, I feel like what I'm doing now is with everything right now is editing. Just because I spent so much of the pandemic in this wonderfully blissful creative state that now that the world is going back into business, I have to go back into production of everything.
Yeah.
Somehow. And I don't know how, but
I do the weirdest thing with Scrivener where I'll have like, like a work in progress document that just has like every single story that I haven't finished that I don't consider crap. And just trying to like sometimes I'll just open up and just look at it and be like, no, not today.
Yeah.
It's like, but it's really important to have that daily practice for me to just do it. And I'm finally getting back on track with that. Because I think a lot of people in the pandemic, I think they kind of started out, I think a lot like you did, in trying to be in like that blissful kind of like, I have the time to do whatever I want. Finally, and then that like kind of just goes away as like just depression sets in, know? So,
well, yeah, I've heard that a lot with people. For me, it lasted a long time up until the pandemic unemployment payments ran out. That
Mm.
was a big part of it kind of going away because I felt almost treated that like a grant to create. But
Yeah.
then there is that sort of, well, all this is done to a point where now I need to actually put it into production. Graphic novels written, that has to go into production. The movie monsters, for the most part, written, that's going into pre-production. And then there's the things that fall into the lap, like the one I have to do in January.
Yeah. Do you like have you ever thought about doing, more of like a home production sort of thing?
What do
Or
you
is
mean?
like I guess just trying to like well I guess it wouldn't work the same way. I don't really I guess I don't really know the exact parts of this project, but like I don't know like I just had this idea to make like a film, actually like a kind of like visual component to like an album in a way. But it's not something that I need like a cast and a crew for. It's something that I would just film myself.
So that's
And
the January project.
okay.
Only I'm not doing it here. I'm doing it in Virginia.
Ah, okay. All right.
But this actor reached out to me, and we actually just did a podcast with him, but it's not out yet. He's like, I got access to X amount of acres with these types of buildings. Would you be willing to come down here and just do something? And I'm like, you know what? I actually need to turn out product, and I have all these projects that are almost ready to go into production, but they're not going to be turned out for a while.
Hmm.
And so I said, sure, let me come up with a concept. I came up with a very simple concept that only involves me, him, and a bowling ball and the woods. And it's, if things work out with the location and we can make it work in terms of just me not having to spend any money whatsoever, I will come down to Virginia and we'll shoot this
I
movie.
mean, there's something to that in terms of like that sort of idea of creative limitations. Like limiting yourself like that is can be so eye opening. Yeah, that's something I like to try to do at times. If I have a draft that or I think sometimes I'll get bored with 1,000 words, or I want to do it differently. So like I did something the other day where like every scene has to be one sentence. The minute you have a period there, you are going to the next scene. No, like no other way. And it's just it's interesting to see sort of what you get out of that. I mean, with like my music too. Like, I mean, I literally just use this modular synth. I don't use anything else from it, and it's so limiting in that way. But you end up finding these new ways to sort of connect things and work with things, and so you end up with something completely different, even though you're using the exact same instrument you made for every other recording you've done. you
Yeah.
know
Some of my
it's interesting.
favorite exercises come from just limited concepts. I remember one time, way early on in our program, somebody gave me, in one of their lectures, they gave us this, that she said her favorite, she was like one of the guest lecturers, and she said one of her favorite writing prompts was stranger in the kitchen. There's a stranger in your kitchen. And one of my favorite chapters of a novel I've been developing is called Stranger in the Kitchen. It came out of that prompt.
Okay. Yeah.
It's so
Definitely
weird
like
and obscure and simple.
yeah, just like that limitation.
Yeah.
I that's kind of why I don't like to do work with something like Ableton, or in some ways it's kind of why I don't like to write a novel, because it's just you're dealing with way too much in a lot of ways. And I'm like I just can't get my mind around it.
Yeah. I've never
Yeah.
finished a novel I've been happy with.
I understand that. I the so my thesis for Sarah Lawrence was a novel, and I liked it. Then I remember I spent it was the first time I'd ever not gone home for Thanksgiving, because I basically just spent the entire time off, just like pretty much from like 5 in the morning to like 5 at night, just editing this thing. And like I finally finished it. And like now that I look at it like a few years later, I'm like, this sucks. Just like I could do this. I could do this differently. I want to do this differently. This thing still has issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like I just don't even know if I have the energy to go and actually make those edits or not. Because I think sometimes you just kind of need to like leave that stuff as it is and just move on. Because otherwise you're spending you're doing a Joyce and you're spending your entire life, writing a single book.
I come into this conflict of medium. So I have this one novel I've been developing for the better part of 20 years about my hometown in Maine. It's about family, it's about generations. There's a time travel component to it. And it's been developed as a film, it's been developed as a novel, it's been very briefly developed as a graphic novel. But it seems like none of those mediums work.
Mm.
And sometimes some of the chapters I can get some real solid prose, but then the narrative style doesn't work for other chapters. And so I'm honestly like, I don't know if it'll ever get done because I just don't know what the best way to tell the story is.
Yeah, I really get that. Like sometimes, I like to think that the story kind of tells you how it needs to be written. That's a very romantic view of looking at it. Um, it's something I wish I think I need to do more because I mean there are definitely parallels all over the art world. Like kind of like that whole like I think the easy one is like Michelangelo with like David saying that like oh he was in there the whole time. I just needed to carve him out or like there's this thing with improvisers just that like the rule of thumb is like you to be a good improviser musically you don't you're actually listening to everybody else and like the best improvisers listen and then act accordingly.
Sometimes I feel like that's just art speak and there's not
Yeah.
a lot of reality to it. Oh, the
Yeah.
Michelangelo, like Michelangelo sings, he was in there the whole time or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, I don't know. I just, I get the romance of that, especially
Oh
if you're
yeah.
at an art opening and you need something to say. That's what they want to hear. But like,
I swear like whenever I read like a you know how like you'll get like like when an album comes out or like when it gets announced you'll get like an EPK about it or what have you, and the way some of these artists describe their work I'm like yeah it feels like that art speak that's just like does this make any sense, like is it just me or
have you listened to my podcast with the guy from Great Art Explained? Because we
no.
have, and I think I have clipped it as well on my YouTube channel. We talk about art speak and how his rule as a curator is when it comes to press and write ups, the artists are not allowed to write the press materials because they're so pretentious and ridiculous about it.
Well, I've had this conversation with my friend who I do a podcast with, and he because sometimes some of our favorite artists are kind of like they have that kind of art speak to them, but I wonder sometimes whether like the art itself is supposed to be like the message that they're trying to say, like in that they aren't able to properly like elucidate those thoughts
Hmm.
in the form of words that what they're trying to say is the music, and so to try to say it any other way it's just going to sound jumbled and
Yeah,
pretentious.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
If you wrote a book, that's what you had to say. If you made a
Yeah.
film, that's what you had to say. And actually, one of the things I liked about I have mixed feelings about the New York Foundation for the Arts, mostly because of their nepotism in there. But when I apply for grants and they say, "Here, give us a write up about what you're doing," they specifically said, at least in last year's directions, avoid pretentious art speak. In so many words, they're like, "We don't want to hear the bullshit. Just tell us what you're doing and why."
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a difficult road to travel down because it's not like you just don't know whether sometimes you just don't know how to say it, and like I mean even it's funny with Anthropica, like I think that's a great book and I love the blurb for it, but the blurb doesn't really match the books in some ways, like it doesn't in my mind it like talked about a very small sliver of the overall book in a way because I think it's it's just difficult to describe a book like that easily because you have all these vignettes that are interconnected, but to just try to describe them on their own, being like, oh yeah, you've got this ultimate frisbee bro, and you've got like this, this economics professor who's finding that the earth is running out of resources, and this and this and this, and it's like, I guess the story is like, how all those pieces mesh, but it can be a little difficult to kind of, see what the intent of the blurb is, like that. The Stars Are Legion, that book I finished, was very much kind of a similar thing, that it sometimes didn't feel like it was actually getting to the point of like what the story was actually about in some ways. It's
Well,
yeah
I feel like with Anthropica, though, Dead Rabbits or Animal Riot, Brian's publishing company,
yeah
they were in a really weird position because it's almost like trying to describe Moby Dick. I don't know if you've read Moby Dick, like the
I
unabridged version.
I haven't. I need to, especially
This,
because like all the drawings and everything, and
right, but the
yeah.
simple way the publishers and now at this point everybody talks about it is the crazy Captain Ahab and the white whale. But
I
it's
feel
so
like
much more than
they don't
that.
even talk about it like that. That they're just like, oh, the legendary novel, and it's like
Yeah,
that doesn't even
it's
say anything.
but what a more accurate description is of this is an amazing work of experimental literature that changed the American literary world forever. And the key there is experimental novel. Nobody ever describes Moby Dick as an experimental novel, but it's 100% an experimental novel.
Yeah.
It's a fucking weird book. The
Oh yeah.
Ahab and the white whale and all that stuff, that is such a tiny component of what's there. You got a whole chapter that's the craziest sermon you'll ever hear a
Yeah.
preacher give.
I mean, I always hear about the chapters that are just all about like whaling techniques
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Or like
It's
the guy's obsession with taking like uh I, I guess the flakes off of fish and putting them in his journal, or like it's just like this weird stuff. And but again, if you're a publisher, people aren't going to buy a book if you're talking
yeah.
about this guy. The narrator has some pretty strange psychological issues. He's really unreliable. His name might not be Ishmael. He might be lying to you, and
I
there's
mean,
every indication that he is.
part of it is like you sometimes have to wonder, like I feel like they're working with like a limited scope, that like they're like, you need to just like we need to describe this thing in under 500 words,
Yeah.
because otherwise, I mean, I guess you have what literary scholars have been doing since Moby Dick came out, and just trying to analyze this book.
Yeah, and honestly, Anthropica, it's at the level of how the fuck do we promote this to regular people?
Yeah.
MFA guys, we're gonna read it. We're gonna
Yeah.
get what he's doing, mostly, and we're gonna decide for ourselves whether it's a masterpiece or not. I personally think it is, and I think it's at that level of Herman Melville in its own way, in its own genre, in its own era. But I guarantee you, my sister's not gonna like that book.
Yeah.
My parents, they're not even going to touch that book. They're never even going to hear about it. I mean, unless they listen to this, which they probably won't. But Brian's mission, though, is to get a few of those regular people to buy it so that they can break even at the very least.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
No,
the hard
for
part.
sure. For sure.
So
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting, topic right there, is sort of, because I think kind of like the utility of art kind of feeds into that a little bit. And like, I think that's like kind of what, a lot of us are going through right now, is we're dealing with a world that doesn't have a way to quantify a lot of the work that we do, because it's oftentimes it's not, if it's not, if it's not Star Wars, if it's not like directly, I think a lot of times it's just like we want to put a price tag on it. Like I think that's usually how we value things in our world. It's worked out kind of okay in some respects. because you can just say, oh, gold is this much, but like when it comes to something like art, it's so personal to the person who's experiencing it, and it's even more personal to the person who made it. And so to have someone be like, oh yeah, this is worth doing, like this is worth your time, it's just so it's super difficult. You just can't quantify that. And so even though there is not a single person, I think, on the planet I probably who has ever lived who hasn't had art affect them in some way, even though it's such a universal thing, we still can't get around to the fact that we need it in a way. And the only way to move it forward is to let people keep doing it, and to play around with new ideas. And like I think about like it's like those people who are like, it feels like every few years people are just like, oh, we need to defund NASA, kind of. Or like, we need to take away funding for this research or what have you. And it's like, I get it. Like like you're going on the grounds that, oh, NASA hasn't put anybody on the moon in like, a while, and so therefore it's not worth it. And it's like, that's just untrue, because they're doing a bazillion other things. And, it's just the whole point of research is not to discover the utility of something. It's to discover, sort of what can be discovered. And, eventually there is a way to sort of fit that, to use that research for something, that can be more useful to the average person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people have that sort of immediate big reward mentality.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
I deal with investors all the time, and they're the worst because they want turnaround like that, and it has to be
Oh
obvious and
yeah.
guaranteed. And I'm just like, everything's a process, man. Like,
Yeah.
invest
Oh
in the
yeah.
process. Eventually, if you stay with it, whatever it is, you'll figure out whether it's useful or not. And I do think there's some benefit too to putting energy into figuring out if something's not useful. We don't have to be on the moon. We were on the moon. There's nothing
Yeah.
there. The only benefit at this time I can think of to putting anything on the moon is having an observatory without light pollution, so we can better look at the
Yeah.
universe. But other than that, like, what's the point?
Yeah. But I mean, like the point is more like, but my argument was more just like NASA's doing all of
Yeah,
these
they're
other
doing
things.
all kinds of things. They're
Exactly.
figuring out how to fucking let people live up there without having to. I mean, the amount of psychological and physiological issues humans have on the space station, they're
Yeah.
solving all those problems, and people don't realize that. We haven't solved those problems. We need
Yeah.
NASA to help solve those problems. But, people are, they're going to do what they're going to do. And
Okay. I think it's just like, it's, you want to feel like something's valuable, and, you kind of want to cut it out if it isn't. And the thing is, oftentimes a lot of these things that I aren't, very obviously valuable. Like they aren't striking you in the face with their utility. It's
yeah,
it's much more nuanced than we'd like to think. Um,
yeah. And
yeah,
people to generally have to be taught that the world is complex and nuanced. It's not black and white. It's
yeah,
gray. It's a very gray world. It's a gray universe.
it really is. It's and even though I believe that, I even find it difficult to do that at
It's
times.
tough to. Well, I've been digesting these philosophical discussions as of late about this idea that the more we evolve to survive reality, the less we're able to perceive the world, that the universe as it truly is. So
Mm,
we've evolved in a way where we benefit a great deal from perceiving the world as black and white.
yeah,
There's good, there's bad. They're out to get you. There's food over there. And by evolving to have that be our second nature, we're unable to see sort of the reality of things, the complexity of things. And we have to stop and think for a moment. Okay, the world is a little more complex. There's also little critters over here. I mean, I'm just shooting the shit, but I don't know. It's just I'm thinking about that idea of evolution fucked us in one way, just so we could survive another way. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there are like spiritual thinkers out there who believe that, sort of we are slowly evolving towards, sort of a more of a conscious mindset, that sort of the things that, like that initial need for survival might, we're slowly we're kind of evolving beyond that in a way, in that, in more of a like a spiritual dimension, in terms of like, we don't need to worry about how am I going to get food, that, like, because I think, I mean, I think it could be really easy for me to kind of just dive off into that sort of talk for a little bit. But I, just sort of the idea that, what you have, like what you need will be provided, that there's no need to worry about it. Like Alan Watts has a book called The Wisdom of Insecurity. And it's like kind of just all about that idea that, we need, like, our reality is a very insecure, scary place, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. And that, because, with insecurity comes change, and change, I think, is the ultimate governor of life. And so, it's about being able to embrace that insecurity, that I think will end up yielding the best results. But, again, a lot easier to talk about in theory than to actually put into practice.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like you're talking about letting go.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I was
Because we
talking
want to
about.
control everything. We want to know everything. And there's no way to know everything or to control
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, yeah. That's something I have to grapple with a lot, of just, knowing that, like, when you see people that you love, going through something, and you see them maybe making a decision that is probably going to end up screwing them over in the end, or something like that. And there's nothing you can do, and there's nothing you should do, because you want them to be able to come to their own decisions, And I think that's a big part of education, is sort of letting people find out for themselves, instead of, because I think like our education system right now is kind of like not about learning about yourself and like actually learning about things. It's more like, know what I told you to know, you
Yeah.
know
Well,
it
I've always said that the education system seems to be more about making the person into a utility,
exactly.
which
Yeah.
is like not what it's supposed to be for.
Yeah, no, it's supposed to be, the making of an independent person, but I obviously, we're dealing with, a society that needs, it needs cogs for the machine,
Yeah.
so it like, I feel so cynical and kind of jaded talking about it like that so easily, but like, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of the truth in some
It is the
ways.
truth. We don't need to
Yeah,
dive deep into that though.
yeah.
Did you ever? So you mentioned consciousness initially, because that's also a big part of. That's the big sort of word that seems to be emerging with a lot of these things I've been listening to.
Hmm.
What is consciousness? Is it extend beyond the self? That sort of thing. Have you ever listened or read about any of the stories about this place in Utah called Skinwalker Ranch?
No.
It's this ranch in Utah. In the 90s, this rancher, his cattle were getting mutilated. And there were these spooky, ghostly things that were happening. And he had to get rid of it, as he was losing a ton of money on it. And this aerospace billionaire from Las Vegas named Robert Bigelow made him an offer and bought it for like $400,000. And then he hired the rancher to stay on. And he turned the whole thing into a scientific research operation for like 10 years or something like that. You can look this up. It's
Yeah.
crazy. And I'll send you some podcasts about it too, the ones that I think explain it the best. And they got documentation of weird shit happening. Their cameras being destroyed, like systematically, like whatever is there knew how to do it. There were sightings of things that resembled sort of kind of like Predator, where you can't really see it, but you recognize a wave.
Yeah, you see, there's a shimmer.
Yeah, a
Yeah,
shimmer.
yeah.
And but then also orbs that would fly in and out of the ground.
Okay.
There was some of the security guards there observed portals being opened and like bright blue sky daylight on the other side. It was night here. They would see like a bright blue sky on the other side and things flying out of it, and then the portals closing. And this is all documented with this research team that Bigelow sent there.
Yeah.
Other crazy shit too. I mean, the fucking list. Every paranormal thing you could possibly conjure up, it happened. And then, so the U.S. government says, well, we would like to go to Skinwalker and check it out. And so the Pentagon sends a guy there. Of course, we all know that they're only after technology. If it's alien, you know, they don't know. The moment the guy sets foot on the land, he sees this technological device that looks alien, but he's the only one who sees it. And so the guy left and he made his report. He's like, whatever's there knew what I was there for before I even arrived. And it was fucking with me. And so out of all this, Bigelow, he didn't get technology for his aerospace company. He didn't really get much of anything tangible. What he ended up doing was dissolving the teams. He sold the land, and he immediately formed a new nonprofit to investigate the reality of consciousness. Something about that whole experience pushed him towards researching consciousness rather than how we would typically want to investigate. Oh, we just want
Yeah.
to figure out the technology behind it.
Yeah, like I mean, definitely you would think that somebody in that position would just go immediately to UFO conspiracies and turn into like that David Icke lizard people sort of conspiracy thing.
But the thing is there was a component of that, but there was also demonic components. There was ghostly components. There was apparitions. There were nightmares. Like they were in the brains of everybody who was there, and they knew who was coming and why they were there. Like, and everybody there who had experiences would say the same thing. Like, whatever experience was tailor made for me, yada yada yada. And I can't prove any of it. Sorry, guys. You can never prove anything like that. But they did come out with some interesting stuff, though, that the mosaic pointed to look at consciousness for the answer. And I think that's fascinating because he immediately invested in consciousness research.
That is real. I mean, I think the most interesting thing about that is that you have, kind of like a 1%er almost, just sort of taking that initiative towards something that,
he's the only one.
Yeah.
He's the only one who's acknowledged that, one, we're not alone. We never have been. And the fact that we have a multi-billionaire with defense contracts, running an aerospace company, investing millions of dollars into this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
He was the one that for a while had the contracts with the government. Whenever somebody filed a UFO report with MUFON or with the Department of Defense, his contract said that they had to hand over all those reports to him. He was the one that was contracted to investigate that stuff. Like, he asked for it. He's like, I care more about this stuff than any of you guys.
What's the name of that philosophical thought that was like you're the only person in the universe in a way? It's not narcissist. I can't remember the name.
There's a few that I don't know the name of it, but there's a few that I've heard of where like there's one that's I find fascinating where there's one soul that lives every life. Oh, so you and me are the same person, but living.
I think we were both in Hollander's class. Do you remember that story that one of our peers brought in? It was The Egg by Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian. Because he that's like that whole story is like this guy dies and he meets God basically, and God's like, no, I'm you. You have been everybody that has ever lived. You've been Hitler, and you've been every Jew that he exterminated.
Yeah.
And and like the thing is, you are growing and you are the universe, and like when you get to a point, you are going to be like a god in yourself. And it was like this like mind-blowing thing where like afterwards you're like, oh, where's the acid I just took? Just,
Yeah, I love that kind of philosophy because one, it forces you to confront something. Somebody else put that differently too in a lecture I was listening to where they're like, they did soul searching, and they're like, did you know that all that at least some of your molecules were also part of George Washington? And they would also
yeah,
drop these Gandhi type names, and then this person was saying like, but what really hit it home is when I realized that if all that is true, then some of my molecules are also Hitler. Some of my
yeah,
molecules are also Stalin. And it's just
yeah,
like, fuck.
yeah. That's one of those things. It's just like, yeah, to be on, yeah. Like kind of this is weird, but like, have you ever done like any of the Myers-Briggs tests before?
Oh, the MBTI. Yeah, we did a
Yeah.
podcast about it and how
Oh,
it's being
okay.
misused by HR offices now.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely see that being. I mean, it's definitely it's flawed in the way that you can't really describe the totality of a person using just a label,
Yeah.
but
But
have you ever looked up famous people with your MBTI type?
no.
Because like it can be devastating sometimes. So like I've taken it like 20 times. I think only once have I not got an INFJ. And I've looked up famous INFJs, and it's like, oh yeah, Hitler, Stalin, like just basically every dictator who has ever lived is like an INFJ. And I'm like, oh no,
Well,
I don't like,
they're
oh no, dude.
so a lot of them have the artist mindsets,
Yeah.
and are failed artists. And that's the one warning nobody fucking listens to me about. Stop fucking with artists and let them succeed because they're just going to be the ones who exterminate you down the road. Like it really is. Look, when I moved to New York, and I always I have never really told this story, but I always hated this woman for telling me this. She claimed to be an empath and that
Oh yeah.
she could read people's souls or
Yeah.
whatever. And she
Yeah.
goes, Eric, but I can't read you. You're empty behind your eyes. I'm like, fuck you. You have no idea who I am. And I got so offended by it. But she goes, wait, are you an artist? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, that's the problem. There's something about artists, like true artists, where they can either be very creative or very destructive.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think an INFJ is definitely more of like an idealist type. Like they want the world a certain way, and I think that can be twisted for good or evil
Yeah,
pretty fast.
100%.
With the empath thing, I was talking to my therapist yesterday, and we were talking about empaths very briefly, and she was she pulled out a book that was like on them, and she was like describing all these different things being. And so I'm like, okay, listening to this. I'm like, this is like, is this really real? Or because like a lot of this stuff, if like a psychologist was looking at it, this could be easily be like like interpreted as codependency and like
Yeah.
neuroticism. And it's like it's so screwy because
Well,
like empathy is a human condition. It's part of what makes us human. So like sometimes it just feels like that kind of I hate to use the word, but like snowflake type of mentality, but it almost feels like an elitist snowflake, that it's like we're all special, but I'm more special than you.
right. Well,
In a way.
with this woman, one, my bullshit detector went off immediately because apparently all the ones she sensed, all the men in the workplace that she sensed as being really wonderful hearted, open, trustworthy men were all hot, and they were all somehow these really model like men. And I'm like, are you sure you're not just horny? Like
I sense a pleasing aura around you. Here's my
they
number.
yeah, they fell into a certain type, and
Yeah.
I was far from that type, and So some part of me feels like she was full of shit. It's sort of like that joke in I don't know if it was Guardians of the Galaxy or one of those movies, but like there's an empath who and somebody just explodes and he's like ah and she goes I sense you're angry and it's just like come on.
Do you remember which one that was? Because like I've only watched I think the first one. I've fallen off so hard with Marvel.
I don't remember because I've seen them all and they got me through the first part of the pandemic on loop. So it's just like they're all one movie at this point mentally.
I mean, not to be this person, but they kind of are the same movie.
Yeah, they're the same movie over and
Like,
over again, but even together they're just one movie. It's just
yeah, like it's so samey, kind of.
yeah.
It's I had to stop watching them. I think after like the first and like what was like the first Infinity War movie. I was just like, okay, I'm done.
Well, after they wrapped it with Endgame, and then they had a Spider-Man movie after that, I felt like it. Okay, the story is as done as it's going to be,
Well,
and
come
now
on,
they're
come on.
setting up
Phase,
another
phase
story.
one is done, or phase
Well,
two, or
we're on
whatever.
like 4 or 5 or something
Yeah.
like that, but the phases are done, and now we're on a different phase with different characters. And so far, I'm not that invested. Like I'm watching
Yeah.
them because my girlfriend wants to watch them. You know, all the shows on Disney Plus and all that shit. But like, I don't know. I just don't. They're not as
Yeah.
exciting as
I
they
mean,
were initially.
do you think that like I think about this sometimes is like that whole idea that like the cinematic universe and having like all these interconnected projects. I feel like that is it can be a big issue when it comes to story because I think you're not really letting smaller stories be told, and just sort of the pressure to connect every little thing I think over can make
Right.
an overall weaker narrative as a result.
Yeah, I don't think they care.
Yeah.
As a Disney stockholder, I can tell you that the reports I get have no information at all about any indication that they care. They just are turning out product that's yielding a ton of money,
Yeah.
and that's the formula that worked for a decade, and they're gonna try it
I've been
again.
saying that for years. It's just Hollywood doesn't that's the biggest issue with Hollywood right now is that you wonder why indie films are becoming more and more popular. It's because all the big studios just trying to invest in what is going to bring asses into the seats.
Well,
You know?
everybody in charge, the bean counters, the executives, they don't come out of a passion for it.
Yeah, no,
You
definitely.
know, and
Yeah,
so they don't know how to look at it. They don't know what to look for. The best produced films, at least in terms of Hollywood, I'm not going to talk about the independents.
yeah,
That all ended at the turn of the century for the most part. I mean, there were a few straggler Hollywood movies that came out that were interesting, but when you had actual filmmakers who were producing on a regular basis with their hands on, like Spielberg in the 80s and 90s was hands-on producer for some of these projects. And when you have producers who are filmmakers, that makes a world of difference. And when you have producers who can talk their financial people off a ledge and say, just stay
yeah.
with me for a little bit, it'll be worth it. One of the filmmakers who's still working today who's really good at that is David Fincher. He's never had Final Cut on any of his projects, which is
Really?
shocking.
Yeah.
But he knows how to talk with his financial people. He's like,
Yeah.
trust me, it'll work.
That,
And he just has.
that's like that is the biggest issue I think maybe facing artists right now is like being able to sort of politic like that and to be able to talk the talk
Yeah.
because like it's so easy to just want to go like there's this pressure right now to be on social media and to market yourself in all this in this special way, and it's so like it sucks because you like I don't know about you, but I would rather be writing. I would rather be making stuff than getting into some flame war on Twitter.
Right. Well, I'm not really even on Twitter. I'm holding an account with my handle, but I don't actively. I'm not on there because it's just such a poisonous environment.
Oh
But
yeah, I don't either. I mean, like I was really struggling with that. Was just trying to because like I'm thinking about things like I don't know, like it's very tempting to want to go into academia or something like that. But I've seen people like Hollander and David Ryan and just get kind of chewed by the machine that
Yeah,
is academia. And at the same time, I don't really want to go into this commercial publishing world either because it just feels like you're kind of doing the same thing for different masters.
right.
And so I'm just like, okay, I need to do my own thing. But the only way to do your own thing is to market yourself on social media, it feels like. And I'm like, okay,
It's hard.
I just can't do that. Like I just can't do that with myself. Like
Yeah.
I just, social media is just so for me just depressing,
Well, I have
you know?
rules because I hate it too, and it does affect psychologically. It's the
Yeah.
most destructive thing that my generation has invented. It's
Yeah.
horrible. We should be embarrassed by it. But my rules are simple. Twitter is a no-go. I'll hold
Yeah.
the Eric Norcross Pod. I'm just holding the name for now. Maybe it'll improve, but I doubt it. It's one of those things where like, has anybody figured out that you can't sway elections by bitching on Twitter? No? Okay. But you're going to keep trying anyway. That's Twitter to me. And then there's Facebook, which is just like if you build a page to try to get fans, they won't show it unless you pay for promotion. So that's dead. So I
Yeah.
don't put energy into that. I with Facebook, my rule is if I don't know you personally, you're not a friend, and I limit it to no more than 75 people. I can't keep track of more than 75 people.
Isn't
And
that like
how
statistic that you can only
I
pay
don't
attention to
know,
like so
but
many
that just
people?
seems to be where I start losing it. But I manage to keep it under because I have very strict rules. One, if you're
Mm.
not using it to keep in touch with me, there's no reason for us to be connected. Or if you post a rude comment, even if it's joking, I don't want somebody teaching a person that anybody else on it that they can post rude comments and that I won't do anything about it. I had
Yeah.
this guy I grew up with post a snarky comment. He meant it in fun, but I'm like, look, I can't have you telling other people that it's okay to post stuff like that. I don't like it. It's public. It's rude. I get it because I know you and I know your personality. But when you read it without that context, it looks like I'm letting you talk shit to me. So
Yeah.
I deleted it and I said, look, let's just text. And so we just text and we're not connected on there. So when it comes to Facebook, it's very strict. And that all goes back to a production where it was a bad business deal and I had a lot of people that my producers owed money to and they were using my Facebook to track my mood so that they could tap me and be like, "Hey, what's the status with this?" And so I'm like, you know what? Only people that one I'm not in business with, and two that are true friends and are in regular contact with me are on my Facebook. So with that, I'm able to keep Facebook out of my mainstream life
Mm.
because there's only a handful of people that contact me on there. I only have like 46 connections at this point.
Yeah.
With LinkedIn, that's strictly business. That's how I get client work.
Yeah.
That's how I get in touch with recruiters and connect with past clients and just say, hey, from a professional standpoint, here's what I'm doing. My podcast always gets blasted to LinkedIn because that's where a lot of downloads come from, especially the entrepreneur episodes.
Mm.
If there's anything remotely entrepreneurially related, LinkedIn is the go-to for that. But the one I'm really focusing hard on is YouTube. I want that shit to work. And I'm slowly growing it. Like I had less than 50 followers last year. I'm now at 182
Yeah.
and I'm
That's
I'm getting about 3 or 4 a week, which is really steady and
yeah.
exciting. And I know that 182 isn't a lot in the YouTube sphere, but for
Yeah.
me, it's an achievement because I'm legit working for it. And I
Yeah.
have a philosophy about that too. Is like after a certain point, it'll grow exponentially, and then I don't have to work for them anymore because they'll just come. The
Yeah.
algorithm will end up serving me. But the first 500, I'm going to be working my ass off to get those.
For
And
sure.
that's where I'm really curating content, scheduling everything for weekly releases because I'm learning the algorithm, and I can choose how personal to get. The
Yeah.
version of me on here is very much me. I'm giving you everything I want to be in my life. I want to be a guy who just talks about art, occasionally puts it up. My content is incredibly diverse. You'll have me reading verse that I write, which isn't that interesting and they get no views, but the idea is me. This channel is me.
Yeah.
My short and experimental films, which will get views, but then they'll also get really shitty comments from people, which is fine. It's part of the discourse. And then there's the podcast, which is basically a stand-in for the fact that we haven't been able to go to film festivals or to art gallery openings or to pubs to hear people read, which is where I would normally have these conversations.
Yeah.
But it turns out I like it. And so I'm probably going to keep doing it regardless. Because if there's one thing I like better than creating art is talking about it.
Yeah, same here. I'm totally with you there. I mean, that was always the best thing about grad school for me, was being able to talk to people like you, like David, like, a lot of the other people I knew there, and just to have these conversations about things. That's, I think I said this at the beginning of this podcast. It's just, I need community, and I need the right community for me.
Have you, I mean, have you say you're struggling with social media, though. I'm interested in what, out of all of them, is there anyone you would think about focusing more on? I mean, you already have a podcast.
Yeah. Well, that podcast is more like, I don't know. That's just like a fun thing me and my friend do. We just talk about music every week and stuff, and talk about books about music and all that nerdy shit. Usually, like, so it's funny. A couple of years ago, I actually deleted everything on my Facebook. Like, it took me 3 or 4 hours to do, but I deleted. So if you were able to even find me on Facebook, I would just be a blank profile, basically, that I just keep it up for Messenger and stuff like that, just because, you have relatives who you don't have their phone numbers. You kind of need that. Yeah. But I was doing Reddit for a while. I really didn't like Reddit. It felt like it was pretty negative after a while. I mean, which social media in general. So I ended up leaving that. But what I'm trying to do now, so I have a website that finally went up this week with my own domain. Finally, I've been working on it since like August. So I'm hoping to sort of, be able to put my work there, but also be able to talk about it and like talk about the process behind it. Because I think that's a really important part that doesn't get talked about a lot. But I think on top of that, there's a great music community that I really want, that I really like, that it's just full of really nice people. It's called Lines. I could spell out the URL, but it's nuts. It's like 5ls.co or something like that.
You can email it me.
Yeah. It's a great thing. Like, the people there are just super nice. It just feels like a real community there. But I think more than that, I mean, as thing, I'm in New Hampshire right now, but I'm looking to get out because I need to be in person with people, and I mean, thankfully things are opening up, and that's the thing I think I need more than anything, because this conversation that we're having feels more real than pretty much any interaction I've ever had on Reddit. So,
well, Reddit is a shithole.
Yeah, but it's just like, even like an email can be really great to interact with somebody to an extent, but it's still nothing compared to actually having a conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
And that's what I really need. And a lot of the people who have inspired me the most have been these, are part of these massive, communities that are, doing amazing experimental work. And those are the type of people that I need to rub elbows with,
So where are you thinking about going?
I don't know. I'm thinking about going back to New York, actually.
That's where it's at.
Yeah, see, that I'm starting to think that because I mean, it's weird, but I kind of want to hang out more with like musicians than writers in some ways.
I recommend that, actually. Yeah. Never hang out with the people who do what you do.
Oh, it's not that, like, because there are writers that I really like, that I love talking to. I mean, like this is a good example of that. It's more just like I find music to be just so fascinating, and just it's something that's inspired me just so much since I was, a teenager, and so I like that's the kind of world that I really vibe with a
You
lot
know
more
who I
than
think I think you would have loved taking a class with Jake Slichter.
I was just gonna say. Yeah, that was one of the classes I missed out on because I talked to him for a little bit and he was just one of the nicest guys and just really he got it. Like, that's yeah. I mean, it's just I like talking to writers. It's just I think a lot of them are kind of have like that literary mindset
Yeah,
that is kind of like philosophy, conceptual, ideas above the actual writing. Or you on the other side of the spectrum, you have those sort of the more genre writers who are like, I need to get published,
yeah.
and you need to read my 7-volume space opera. Um, and all due respect to both of those people, it's just that I often feel like I don't belong in either of those worlds. So
Yeah. I mean, with the I know exactly what you're talking about when you talk about the literary people. They
yeah,
love books more than the process, and
yeah.
that's fine if you're, but
Well, I meant more like, like I think a lot of them are, like especially if you go to like a lot of like postmodern writers,
mm,
they're focused on, semiotics and like, French cultural criticism and like the philosophy of language and all that stuff. And don't get me wrong, I find some of that to be very fascinating. It's just that like oftentimes it feels like that takes over their entire writing. Like they
yeah,
don't really care, like I've said, like it feels like they care more about what they write than how they write it.
yeah. No, I feel that.
Yeah,
And then what was the other one? The other one was
it was like kind of like commercial, like
commercial
genre.
publishing. Yeah, yeah, commercial.
Yeah,
That's just like, oh, you got an end goal. That's fine, but we can't have we can't really have an in-depth conversation when really what you're looking
oh,
for is people to
I
read 7 volumes of a space
well,
opera.
I mean, okay, good example of why I need to get out of New Hampshire. A couple years ago, was before the pandemic. I went to a writing group that was sort of local in my area, and I was the youngest person by at least 20 years. Mind you, I was probably like 26 or 27 at the time. So, and all they talked about was NaNoWriMo, like pretty much the entire time. All they wanted to do was like ask me if this was publishable or not. And, yeah, it's just like, I admire the gusto to want to get published and the fact that they're even putting in, the effort. But I feel like you're going, it's like, it's almost like you're going about it the wrong way that, your work needs to stand on its own. It's not going to get published because it's publishable, if that makes any sense. It's
Well,
going to
a
be
lot
published
of that,
because it's a strong piece of work
yeah,
in
the
my mind.
problem though is a lot of that is rooted in this unfortunate reality that there are certain I'm going to put this very lightly, tonal expectations. So,
Yeah.
you know, I have the hardest time with literary journals, for example. I don't write
Mm.
the way I write isn't what literary journals typically want.
Same here.
And that's the big worry with a lot of these people, because a lot of them aren't interested in what their voice is. They're just interested in what will the editor at this particular literary journal want. So that's all
Yeah.
I care about. And that's a problem too, is because you basically have these editors who are dictating what the accepted voice is for an entire medium.
Yeah.
And I don't. I think all writers should stop serving that. To be totally honest.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Over like the last 10 years, other mediums of art like music have been, opened up, and sort of the gatekeepers of that have been largely, eliminated to an extent, by the internet. And I've just, the same doesn't feel true for writing. It feels just as hackneyed and, sort of stayed in its own um traditions, that it always has been. And it's really frustrating because, I'm totally with you. Like I don't want to serve this journal gatekeeper, but I also don't want to serve, sort of the academic gatekeeper either. And so that's why, like, I finally, I'm just like, I'm just gonna like fuck it. I'm gonna do my own thing. I'm gonna just do my own website. I don't really care what happens to it. It's what's important to me is making it, and that and sharing it. That's really it.
You
So
should listen to the episode I did with Brian Birnbaum, he's the founder of that press that published David.
yeah,
He talks about, I grilled him extensively about how do you start a publishing company, because he published his own book. And I think it's worth it, not only for you, but for anybody who wants to do something truly true to their voice, and not working for someone else. If you want to create something true to your voice and still make a living off of it, it's worth looking into how do you get it published without going through other people. He
yeah,
did that. And then he ended up publishing David's book. And I think that's remarkable that we
yeah.
live in an age where that's even possible.
Oh
You
yeah.
know,
I mean, it's, for sure. I mean, I feel like I make like a million music analogies. It just brings me back to, sort of the hardcore punk movement of like the 80s, where you had all these people just making zines and making record labels and just doing their own thing, just completely DIY. Like like that's one of those things that like, say what you will about the internet, and like I totally agree, about the negatives, but like the positives are like things like that doing something yourself is a million times easier than it ever has been.
there's also a component that's so important is we get to keep ownership.
Yeah. Yeah.
Own your negative, own your masters in the music industry to be masters, in the
Yeah.
film industry to be negative. Yeah, I guess in writing would be manuscript, and you can own it, and you don't have to forfeit that to somebody else,
Yeah, for
because
sure.
that somebody else is going to pass it down to the next person who didn't earn it.
Yeah.
I
I
remember
mean,
seeing this interview with this guy who from one of the major record labels, and he was going through all these records. It's a YouTube video. If I ever find it, I'll send it to you. And he's like, "Yep, this is all our back catalog. This is paying for my house. I'm paying my house off, and it's all with this, and it's all other people's work. The guy didn't earn it. He just got
uh,
promoted to a position, and it's just like if you can get take down that system,
oh, I
own
know.
your negative, own your masters, and have full control. That's the future of creativity, man.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the way it really should have always been, but you know, but I think, I don't want to take up any more of your too much of your time, but I think, a big part of sort of getting to that mentality is, accepting the fact that sort of the work that's going to come out as a result of independence will probably not be to sort of the level of polish, level of finish that we normally expected. I think you started off. I think we was talking with David Hollander about that. That episode was you were talking about like how like a lot of into like self-published authors, just there's a lack of polish with just their general work, and I think that's just I I think it's important to edit your stuff, and to have it be as best as it can, but I think it's also important to note that I think if you want sort of more independence and more do-it-yourself type of mentality, you're going to get an overall sort of dip in quality in some aspects.
Right. So
Yeah,
I have thoughts on that, and
yeah,
this comes down to a major shift. There needs to be a major shift in the way artists perceive themselves and go
for
about their
sure.
business. And that's that every single one of us needs to look not ourselves, not just as artists, but we need to look at ourselves as entrepreneurs. And what would an entrepreneur do if he was building a new space plane or a new sea-going vessel? He might do the basic design, right? He or
Mm,
she might do the basic design, but they're going to hire engineers to
yeah,
make sure that thing is safe and seaworthy. And they're going to hire other designers to come in and do the touch-ups. And you have to be willing to take an entrepreneurial approach and say, okay, I wrote this whole manuscript. Now I need to bring on editors to, before a few months ago, I was submitting screenplays to these competitions, which I don't really do. I think they're silly, but I was asked to do so by somebody. And, I wrote the screenplay. And before I sent it out, though, you know what I did? I hired Rhea. Do you remember Rhea?
Yeah. Yeah.
I hired her to do my editing.
It's funny because me, Mike, and Rhea actually used to room together.
Oh, okay.
Sarah Lawrence. So,
yeah. So and it was such an obvious thing. Like, I know I'm not gonna be able to find the stuff because I wrote the thing, and I could read it without really reading it, which is half of the problem of being a writer. We know what we wrote, and so I just hired Rhea, and she found so much shit that I didn't realize I was doing. And that's sort of the process, and it's not hard to hire an editor.
Yeah.
And you can give them guidelines, say, I'm only looking for this for now. And then you do another phase where you're only looking for another thing, and create a production process so that you aren't publishing shit. It is so easy. I mean, I am a sucker for buying self-published stuff. If somebody says they're coming out with a new poetry book, I'll buy it. I got Rhea's book on order right now. But, like, here's the thing. So much of it is unedited. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be. It's just people don't think about what they're doing as an entrepreneurial endeavor. They're thinking about it as a purely creative endeavor. Oh, it's so pure. It's just straight from the Word file. There you go. And it's just like, it doesn't have to. You shouldn't ever look at anything that way. Initially, it's like I said when I was showing you the notebook. The best part is making the notebook. Yeah. Everything else after that's production. Everything else after that's entrepreneurial shit. And if everybody can look at their process that way, then there's no reason in the world why we would need an industry to do all that work for us.
Yeah, for sure. Sure.
So that's my preachy. Every episode has me preaching.
I mean, I think that's just like a part of having a podcast in some ways of just going like on like a little rant for a little bit and just a jag, if you will. Yeah. Yeah.